Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My background is for this kind of stuff intelligence, so my job was oftentimes to go into forums after somebody planned an exotic battle plan as the junior officer and in the wargaming, destroy them, and then, get sent out to the woodshed because we did. Very seldom have I seen a briefing that I had to follow, the one we just saw, that so nicely dovetails with the things we're going to talk about. I will say blue is the friendly way to understand something, and I think that blue discussion of what we're seeing was going to perfectly fit. I want you to pay attention because I'm going to kind of mind bend you a little bit, okay? Because I do. I'm sorry about that. But I'm going to kind of mind bend you a little bit, but I'm going to tell you how they see it. And I want you to see that everything she said from the blue perspective, the red threat, the guy who does the opposition is the red guy. He explains it in their language. Fair enough? And I think, in the world of fighting a battle, you have to make sure that the blue and the red line up. If your blue concept does not meet the red where they're at, your battle will fail. And I just think that this thing lined up very nicely, and I'm told I'm followed by somebody who's going to pick up where I left off in certain ways. But I'd like to say on the question of education, I just wrote this note and made myself have to say it. Perhaps the greatest victory that the left had during the Cold War, the victory that guaranteed them long-term success, was when a person ran for president in the 1980s. 1980s, saying he would destroy the Department of Education, and then didn't do it. Because if you understand what was just briefed, understanding a nationalized school, a Department of Education, gave the left the game, and they knew it was a matter of time. And that was a catastrophic defeat. And I think the Soviets were perfectly willing to fold once they had accomplished that mission. That was Ronald Reagan. So it's just important to point that out. I bring that out because I actually do have an Isserbeat quote coming up in this briefing. And so I want to do that. But with that, what I'm going to do is start flying, and we'll talk about it. I always like to start my briefings off with this quote from the two Chinese colonels at the Chinese War College back in, I think, 1997-98 on their concept of warfare called political warfare, which is actually the Maoist insurgency model. I'm not going to read every slide I have, but some of them I am, and this is going to be one of them. Whether it be the intrusion of hackers, a major explosion at the World Trade Center, or a bombing attack by bin Laden, this is before 9/11, years. All of that greatly exceeds the frequency bandwidth understood by the American military, by which we could say our entire national security apparatus. This is because they have never taken into consideration and have even refused to consider means that are contrary to tradition and to select measures of operation other than military means. Pin America down in a 20-year war that has ceased to have any meaning to the average American as every avenue of an information attack occurs. So what do I think it is that they believe the Chinese assessed properly? We're 25 years into this. Did they get it right? Are we going down? And is it going to be going down in a way that we don't even understand the nature of the warfare, such that we're never going to figure it out? Well, I'll tell you what I think greatly exceeds the frequency bandwidth that they know we'll not figure out, is what Lenin told us what it is all about. Dialectics is the theory of knowledge of Hegel and Marxism. This is the aspect of the matter. It is not an aspect of the matter. It is the essence of the matter. So my belief is when orienting against these people, if you know everything about Marxism but not the dialectic, you will lose. If you know everything about the dialectic and you don't understand Marxism, you will win, because it's what drives the train and they say so. And for Lenin, it is about circles, and you're going to see why circles become important here. Human knowledge for the dialectical mind does not follow straight lines, but a curve which endlessly approximates circles in a spiral. And that's why I have this dialectical airplane, and this dialectical airplane flies over the horizon and drops dialectical bombs. And if you see behind there, there's a little yellow line that comes out, and on one side we'll call it the positive charge or the thesis, and on the other you have the red, which is the antithesis. And in this briefing, if we deviate from that, it will be the blue will be us, and the red will be the Marxists. Fair enough? But it will become very important to see how to visualize this, and in fact, much of this is a visualization. Almost all esoteric religions arise out of this concept of the dialectic, going all the way back to Plato. And of course, you know, in the ancient Greeks, they said they got it from the Egyptians. So we're still into the realm of Isaiah, right? Because this is exactly what they were talking about. And we could take it through the French Revolution, to Marx, to Blavatsky, to Lenin, to Mao. But you know, the picture I like to use to instantiate this understanding is what happened in recent years. In December, I think, 2020, the Democratic Party used star chamber tactics to impeach the president. Do you remember that? And when they saw that the Republican Party would fold and allow a sitting president to be impeached based on star chamber tactics, they knew they owned everything. Does that make sense? So when that explosion hits the ground on the bottom, you look straight up, and they initiated the COVID lockdown, which I just don't think had any basis in real medical justification. But you know what it does do? You know what it does do? It locks, well, let me rephrase. It puts your enemy in their basement. It puts your enemy in their basement. You can't write novels about this when people believe it. Do you realize that? So what I'd like to point out is, once they realized the impeachment was going through, they launched the COVID lockdown. And when that hit the ground, you see the Antifa was released. But what's also important about this, as that bomb comes down and hits the target, you have the positive and the minus. Why am I saying that? Because they're hitting you with a narrative attack. And not only does the opposition have their narrative in that attack, it's your narrative. And we're going to show you how that works. The entire discussion is fixed. So what happens when you're in this emergency is people say, we have to take care of this emergency. We're in this bomb blast. We have to take care of it. We have to do something. And what happens? Someone says, but you know, there's a bigger picture. Take a look at almost every conservative group. We don't have time to understand the real picture. We have to fight this battle. But you see, if you just fight this battle, you're being pushed from one bomb blast to the next bomb blast by the people who launched them. And you're responding on the terms and conditions of their narrative and a time and place of their choosing. So if the dialectical aircraft is flying over the top, what's the first thing you need to do? Look up. What's the next thing you need to do? Well, first get out of the bomb blast, but then shoot it down. So what I'm trying to get at here, and I'm gonna try to up the pace here a little bit, is we need to see the attack when it's launched. But we only respond when half of our group got blown up. Does that make sense? So this is how these dialectical attacks work. So let me put some operational framework in my little picture. You have something called lines of effort. And from lines of effort, it breaks down into a series of lines of operations, LOEs to LOOs, right? And then lines of operation then give way to lines of action, LOAs. So let's give an example before we get to war on women. Let's take a look at Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. Section 4, the United States shall guarantee to every state in the Union a Republican form of government. Democracy is the opposite of a Republican form of government. From the beginning, it's always been a debased form of republic. That's important when you see your friends use that word, because they're participating in a hostile narrative that cancels out the very language of the Constitution. And it's deliberate. So a Republican form of government, and shall protect each of them against invasion, and on application of the legislature or the executive, against domestic violence. So let's see how we can make this look. You see that. The democracy narrative canceled out Republican in Article 4 of the Constitution. Invasion was canceled by the border, and peaceful protest canceled violence. Do you see that this was a systematic and complete attack that was interoperable between those activities, the Constitution and Article 4? Does that work for you guys? Does this make sense? So let's take a look at that blast zone, and we're going to look at it like this. And so you see the positive and negative, the thesis, antithesis, the left and the right, you know, our side and the other side. And we'll say at the center of that is a narrative. Now, in different briefings, we relate to chapter 11 of Mao's little red book, where it's called the mass line, okay? It's called the mass line, but we'll stay with narrative here, okay? And as those two things circle around the narrative, it creates a containment field. And in that containment field, a pseudo-reality, a false reality is constructed. But because it creates a containment, if you're in that containment, you are trapped in that containment. And of course, as the blue and the red cycle each other, it turns purple for different reasons. Is that fair enough? Okay, so here we go. So if you are contained in that circle, a contained opposition is a controlled opposition. Fair enough? So, in the movie The Matrix, this is the Matrix. You are a blue pill person. So let's going back to it. If you are in that circle, you're churning and being churned. Fair enough? And as you're being churned, you no longer know what you see. You only see what you know. You're always in search of the circle in the round room. So let's take out the left and just talk about the control and the controlled opposition. There you are, that star, and outside the circle you see a real event, and you know it happened. You know it happened. You see it. Let's say the stolen election. And all of a sudden a boundary outside that circle deflects the real event, and another boundary comes inside the circle and it creates a false event inside of it, the pseudo-event. The pseudo-event inside the circle, it may be as real as it has to be, and it may be as real as it has to be for as long as it can be, until the narrative is separated from the real event, and then can achieve separation entirely. You see what I'm talking about? I think this is the number one type of disinformation active measure we see in America today. I think it's the dominant one. So here you have now, all of a sudden, all your reporting is about the pseudo-event, not realizing the real event has been swapped out, and then it's shifted down, so all of a sudden there's nothing behind it anymore, and you don't realize that all you're doing is responding to narratives that are put on news programs. Now that boundary on the inside, that's gaslighting. That's gaslighting you. If you deviate, even on the fair and balanced from their discussion of the election fraud, you're a kook. We're not going to listen to you. On the outside is this Marxist concept called discourse theory. Okay? Discourse theory is just it's as simple as this. Turn off the microphone. Have all your briefings, presentations in the day. Your side comes in the morning, and then during lunch you say, this was so good, we don't need to finish the day. We can all go home. That actually happened to me on Capitol Hill one day. Okay, that's a real life event, an oversight hearing. It's what happens when epidemiologists, doctors, and virologists who are opposed to the vaccine are systematically and completely shut down. This sounds theoretical. It is not theoretical, okay? I believe this is really what happens. Let's do another example, and we're going to shift to the war on women to show how this comes into play. Here you have the master class on how to run elections. And one person who's doing it is David Axelrod, and the other is Karl Rove. Well, I want you to think about this. So long as they are inside the circle, now what's happened is if you disagree with anything they say about elections, you're a MAGA type. And as Republicans, we really tolerate you because we can't get elected without you. But you see how that works? You're completely contained in a narrative that says that they define what your reality is about elections. And this is really important because what we're talking about here is the fact that you are trapped in the circle. And the people who trapped you in the circle are the control and the controlled opposition regime, where that controlled opposition are your side, or you think. So let's take a look at this little graphic here. Can you hear it? So here's my question. Who breadcrumbed its audience into the circle for election 2020? That's right. And who brought the curtain down on you when you were in there? This is very real, I think. And you know,
looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. Looks like meat.
So what? Don't be the meat. Don't be the meat. Okay, so what am I saying here? Back in the day, you could teach children the Pied Piper on bad narratives, or the emperor has no clothes, right? We need to stop seeing what we know. We need to start knowing what we see. I would have said that this is something taught to young men in yeshivas, but I was told recently that's a yeshiva. But I was told it was yeshiva, so I have to get that right. God knows I can't say seminary. But But you see, here's the lemmings going across because, you cannot fly. So let's apply this to the war on women, beginning with the platonic nightmare. Why the platonic nightmare? Because at its core, that's what makes Marxism work. It's the deep in the deep attack. So I'll give you my favorite quote from Joseph Pieper, and we'll start from there. The sophist, Plato says, fabricate a fictitious reality. Let's jump. And yet, the Platonic nightmare, I hold, possesses an alarming contemporary relevance for the general public, is being reduced to a state where people are not only unable to find out about the truth, but also become unable to even search for the truth because they are satisfied with deception and trickery that have determined their conviction. Why? Because they're looking for the corner in their round room. They're trapped in a bubble they can't get out. Okay? So why is this important? Let me go zap from Plato to Bezmenov, because that tactic is the basis for demoralization campaigns and a destabilization subversion effort in Marxism. And it is the case that they copied this Platonic concept. So the moment you bring a country to the point of total demoralization, when nothing works anymore, when you are not sure that it's right or wrong, good or bad, where there is no division between evil and good, when even the leaders of the churches sometimes say ... Are we there? So are we demoralized? Is that not a planned outcome? So here is going to be the quote we're going to use from Plato for the discussion on the war on women. And I want to show you how immediate this is going to become. This is from Plato's Republic. It's book 5. All these women are to belong to all these men in common, and no woman is to live privately without any man. And the children in their turn will be in common, and neither will a parent know his own offspring nor a child his parent. Skip down a couple lines. It is likely that our rulers will have to use throngs of lies and deceptions for the benefit of the ruled. This is what's called the noble lie when people read Plato. It's about taking control of your family. All this must come to pass without being noticed by anyone except the rulers themselves if the guardian herd is to be free from possible faction. Doesn't that sound an awful lot like it takes a village? Doesn't it? So, a key objective of Marxism is the destruction of families. That's a core one. The radical Marxist feminist line of action is aligned with those objectives. Posturing as being pro-woman, it is actually the leading edge on the war on women. So let's take a look at this from our little graphic. The line of effort is destroy the family. The line of operation is gender stuff. And the line of actions are radical feminism, gay, lesbian, trans, and pedophilia. So let's see how that looks. That's how they attack the family, through these gender narratives. Do you see that they're ruthless in their effectiveness? And note that those gender lines of action, they bang into each other even as they relentlessly reinforce each other. Make sense? So here we are. We're coming to the Frankfurt School's archetype female role model, the one they proffer. And I have to warn you, when I say this is genuinely disturbing, it's actually debased. And one of the reasons I have an overuse of the dialectic quotes is because when I was going to use the ones from Juliet, they were so raw that it was just simply inappropriate. So what happened is in 1944, Horkheimer and Adorno wrote a book called The Dialectics of Enlightenment. Horkheimer also wrote the book on critical theory, as you can see. That critical theory. Critical theory is Marxism. If you disagree, you're wrong. Okay? Because here's the thing. Here's a thing from, military terminology. If I could get you to not be able to define me precisely, then I've accomplished the ability to keep you from targeting me precisely. If we could precisely say that is Marxism, and you don't call it that, you're lost. So in this dialectic of entitlement, he had excursus to Juliet, enlightenment, and morality. Okay? So here we go. So what does he say, and how does this relate to Plato's Republic? Of course, the Frankfurt School is Marxism, right? It's the dominant form of Marxism that's being used to take America down. He says conjugal ties must be destroyed for social reasons. Children are to be absolutely forbidden knowledge of their fathers. Why? Because they belong to the fatherland. Does this kind of sound like it's tracking? So who is the Marxism's designated heroine? Juliet, in a book called Juliet by the Marquis de Sade. Okay, and the Marquis de Sade is the Marquis de Sade who wrote things that were so profane, Napoleon threw him into jail till he rotted. And I'm telling you, I told people, you can't read 20 pages of this before you put the book down. I don't think you'd have to go to pretty raw stuff to equal this. And this is where you get the word sadism. And he was that. He was an evil man. So what is this iconic Juliet? Oh, my cherub, my heavenly creature, caroled Olympia, sprinkling passionate kisses on my mouth. You are an arrant, shameless little whore. That is just what every woman should be. Who can observe any rule apart from that of prostituting themselves to individuals of all sexes, all ages, all sorts and conditions? I should like to be a prostitute, but a cheap one. So going back to Horkheimer and Adorno, here's his message to mothers. And of course, Republicans here are the Republicans in the French Revolution. Do not imagine that you will make good Republicans as long as you isolate children in a family. They should belong to the whole community. So you see, we have Plato and It Takes a Village, and we have now Horkheimer doing It Takes a Village. Make sense? So, we're just some of these quotes I'm just going to ring off because they speak for themselves. But here's one that makes it very clear that in Juliet's concept of the state and in the Marxist concept of the state is God. Totalitarian state manipulates the nation. It must possess the means to exterminate the people. Did anybody come out of the COVID period kind of thinking that there was something like that being set up? Yeah. Okay. The religious chimera will be replaced by utmost terror. Wasn't it Marx who said the people must be made to be afraid of themselves? So, the direct attack on women as mothers is identified as antisocial behavior. The family, held together not by romantic sexual love, but by maternal love, which forms the basis of tenderness and social feelings, it conflicts with society itself. So this is an attack on women at the point where women become mothers. There's also no rational basis to oppose incest. It goes on and talks about the science has proven that incest is okay, and of course, science never proved that. It's proved quite the opposite. Women's love is to be abolished like that of a man. And those women who are related to rulers, daughters and wives, should be treated harshly as well. The woman is merely a lower degree of the man. Now, this is Horkheimer speaking about Juliet in this article, but what does Juliet say? You will be obliged to conclude that women is simply man in an extraordinary degraded form. The difference between man and woman, Horkheimer and Adorno say, we would have just as good reason to deny women membership of our species as to refuse to acknowledge the brotherhood with apes. And what does Juliet say? The difference between a man and a woman, of this we may perfectly be confident, is quite as pronounced, quite as important as between man and ape. So there's a one-for-one tracking of what Adorno is saying as the Marxist icon for women and what is actually being said. And of course, Juliet thought that pity should be made a crime. Pity is anything but a virtue, it is a weakness. The strong are allowed to injure the weak. It is the downtrodden, the unlucky, the helpless, said I. One should, whenever possible, make the targets of one's wickedness. Do we see these type of people today running rampant? Yes. Do we see this? Are we living it? My intention is, on the same day, at the same hour, to send all the hospitals in Rome, all the city's poorhouses, all the orphans' homes, all the public schools up in smoke. So Juliet's credo is science. She abominates any veneration which cannot be shown to be rational, belief in God and his dead son, or obedience to the Ten Commandments. So that's Christianity and Judaism right there. See that? That is the target. It actually hasn't changed. So it's really important to understand when Marxism uses the word science, they mean it in a completely different way than you understand that word. But it's every bit as real as our concept of science. And there's an ongoing switch and bait. But it's also important to know from PubMed, the National Library of Medicine, that most published research findings today are not true. So we're living in a false world of science. So let's talk about the criminality that comes in with people like Juliet. Now, leave him the broadest outlets for this criminal capacity. Never punish him save when his darts are directed against you. Allow incest, rape, murder among your subjects, forbid them marriage, authorize sodomy, prohibit them worship of any sort. Does this kind of line up with your DEI charts when they're talking about the gingerbread person? I want to understand, I understand this is raw, and I do apologize for that, but I have to say that this is the level at which this stuff operates. And I think most decent people have to like get down there and learn it, because this is who has access to your children. It is easy to demonstrate that love is nothing but a national superstition, that 3/4 of the world's societies, whose custom is to keep their females under lock and key, have never been subject to the ravages of this imaginative disorder. Juliet, a vital chapter in the policy followed by all those at the head of any government, is to foment and promote the extremist degree of corruption in the citizenry, so long as the subject wastes away body and soul in the delights of gangrenous, enfeebling debauchery. Everybody watch Cinemax? Skinamax? I just like to point out that we are in this slipstream right now. So we plan firstly to have, this is on education, we plan firstly to have done with all these grammar schools, the free ones, which are producing such alarming quantities of poets, painters, and thinkers, instead of the drudges and pickpockets we ought to have. Well, didn't Iserbeat write a book called The Dumbing Down of America? Is this not an ongoing theme that we're seeing right now? So where does this leave us all? Juliet was depraved. De Sade was an extremely sick man. It's the icon of the Marxist female role model. Well, a mental health crisis. Here's the CDC in 2019 pointing this out, but the green are women. And the mental illness, rise of mental illness among women at every category exceeds men. Last year, they had to pick up a crisis in teenage girls. Does anybody surprised by this? Okay. Even the CDC has to flag this, right? U.S. teenage girls experience increased sadness and violence. They go on and show that there's a massive, huge jump in girls who persistently felt hopelessness or which increased dramatically to 57% of teenage girls. Do you think this is an accident of what's going on, or do you think it's the design? So here you have despair of young liberal women. It's a hard chart to read, but the dotted line at the bottom are women, the green line are the average, and the blue line are men. And you have a Pew study that shows that women are suffering dramatically more than are other parts of the population, men. So depression scores by gender in politics, at the top, female liberals, then male liberals, and then what I want to show you is the gap that's formed between liberal and conservative. And I think when they say conservative, really all they mean is not them, not them, okay? So here you have, again, self-deprecation, derogation here. You see liberal girls. You see a huge gap between liberals and conservatives. And now, because I know something's to be said about this, all I really want to talk about, war on women. How about the intentional brutalization of girls? When you put boys who can't make the boys' team get on the girls' team, they could take the best female athletes and hurt them just by virtue of playing the game with them. And that's state policy. How about sanctioned violence? When we have whole groups of people coming into this country, okay, who are allowed to exert violence on the population to get away, that is policy. That is allowed. And I use this quote here, we don't have to go into it. Using foreign thugs to intimidate a country's citizens is not new. In fact, it was chronicled by Aristotle in the Politics. This is how it's done. And remember, my point is Marxism deliberately and intentionally copies that. And of course, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. So here, this is really something. At what point does tolerated become sanctioned? This is Burnsville, Minnesota, where I lived. And I have to stop this.
2020, bro, you gotta show these females nothing but love, you feel me?
This woman is passed
nothing.
out.
Wait.
So I'll stop there because it just gets worse. But this is on social media. It's allowed. It's promoted. Okay? You could clearly see she's passed out. So here we have yet another brand manager who advocates the abolition and the annihilation of families. Do you now see that there's nothing random about that? He's the brand manager for PepsiCo for the Doritos brand. Yep. So we're coming to a close here. And we're going to bring it back to the platonic nightmare.
Do you view this as a parental rights issue at all?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, there's no such thing as parental rights. In Canada, there are parental responsibilities. And in Canadian family law, the primary responsibility of parents is to support and affirm their kids. Children have rights in Canada, and these kind of policies restrict the rights that children have in Canada.
So what does this mean? It means that the state has the power to intervene in your family to take your kid and to do something like transition them. Okay? Do you think that's really different here? It's not. Maybe he's just saying it. So we're coming full circle on this platonic nightmare. That the state can do this to children. That the attack on women is the attack on the family. And so I have this closing comment here, and I'll read it because I had to have my closing thoughts kind of put together. When you see what I just showed you, okay, when you see the vision and the associated behavior just covered, can you read? You can read all that was just briefed as fully subsumed in the narrative. It's baked into the cake. That dialectical bomb that hits has their narrative, and they have your permitted response to the narrative. And anybody else who wants to say something else, like the Christian mom, is an extremist. In fact, they had an FBI SWAT team go after a woman for just going to a Board of Education meeting. So this is deadly serious. So it's fully baked into the narrative. It's entirely scripted because it's in the circle. Narrative attacks are teleologically driven. Okay, what's teleologically driven? This is one of these words we're going to put in motion because we have to restore it. Teleology is the idea that when that plane launches, it has a target that it wants to acquire for the purpose of either positioning it for a future attack for destruction or for destruction. So the minute you see that airplane coming over the horizon, the first thing you try to do is what? Shoot it down. Why? Why? Because if it launches its ordnance on you, you're in the blast zone. And then you don't have time to know what the problem is. You're going to be marched, watch this, marched to this bomb blast, marched to this bomb blast, march to this bomb blast, and you're over the cliff. It's transferred into English as awakened when they translate Mao's Little Red Book. You are, at that point, woke. You see how that works? So, narrative attacks are teleologically driven to a target, the destruction of families. Not just in terms of today's Marxist lines of operation, but along the entire narrative arc that operationalizes Juliet, just as Juliet executes the platonic nightmare, resulting in Bezmenov's end state of total personal and cultural demoralization. And it starts with the war on women. To facilitate the collapse of Western civilization, Marxism seeks to induce the Juliet persona as the archetype female role. And all I would like to say is, do you not see this? Are you not living it? So with that, I would like to point out that if you're in the circle, you're in the churn, and all you need to stop, you need to take the red pill, if you will. You need to get out of the cave, if you want to go platonic, but you need to stop seeing what you know, and you have to start knowing what you see. And with that, I would like to thank you all.